Senior Futurist at the Institute for Futures Research, and today I have the privilege of speaking to Professor Piet Naude. Now, I really like Piet for the many hats that he's wearing. I'm only going to highlight 3 of those. The one is that he's the director of our business school. The second one is that he's a really wise ethicist. But the third hat is the one that I really appreciate the most, and that is that he can explain really complex concepts in such a manner that we, the people of the earth, can actually understand it. So Piet, hello and welcome, and thanks for talking to us.
Hello, Doris. Great pleasure, everybody listening or seeing. A great honor to be part of the IFR process, to think a little bit about, I think, SDGs, Sustainable Development Goal number 16.
Yes, SDG 16 is the one that focuses on promoting peaceful and inclusive societies and building accountable and inclusive institutions on all levels. Now, Piet, my first question, how are we doing in terms of this SDG in your view?
Yeah, I think depends on who the we is, obviously. If we sit in South Africa at the moment, you can see Table Mountain and the sea behind me. If you think of the global situation in terms of peace, we have had, the big wars, so-called world wars, in the early part of the 19th century. And everybody tells us that empirically speaking, the world is a more peaceful place in the sense that overt wars are much less than in the past. But I think it's a bit more complex than that. If you look at a country like South Africa, 21,000 people are murdered every year. Our president last night in a speech to the nation explained the coronavirus, and then towards the second half of his speech he said, we have a second virus in this country, and that is violence. That's the opposite of peace against women and children and vulnerable people in society. So I would say one should be very careful when you talk about peace. Peace on a global scale, the conflicts are now different. It's more data conflicts. It is trade wars. It's no longer wars where people shoot each other with guns and rifles or swords. So I would say, if you ask us globally, the overt kind of violent conflicts are much less, but the below the surface kind of conflicts are still there, and they're quite severe, whether it's a trade war between China and the US, or whether it's a data war around influencing elections. And in South Africa, on a more physical scale, I think we're not close, Doris, to what one can call a peaceful society that creates sustainability. Many people who leave South Africa, of all races, will tell you, many of them would say, it's the fact that I don't feel safe, the fact that I don't have peace. And I think that's an indictment on us, and it's going to require massive input from us to move beyond this point.
Yes, for sure. In terms of our institutions on different levels and them being accountable, do you have views on how are we doing in terms of that?
I think what we find is that globalization has developed unevenly. The movement of people across the world is fairly easy now. We've got the transport means to do that. Economic cooperation is truly a global thing. There's no way that you can isolate yourself as a country and create a whole supply chain all from your own country. We simply don't work that way anymore. The world has become really integrated in the global sense of the word. But the problem is that our governance structures, I can say the political part, the small p of global governance, is still lagging behind that. We don't have the same sophisticated instruments to, for instance, ensure human rights or free and fair elections, as we would have to make sure that trade is fair and people play according to the rules. But in South Africa, we have, in principle, very good rules around our institutions, but in practice, they are failing us for a great part. And the reason in our own specific history is that some of the most important public institutions that should serve the nation, whether they are state-owned enterprises that provide key services like electricity or transport, or whether it is the prosecuting authority that must ensure fair trials, that has been severely compromised in the last 9 to 10 years, and we still have some work to do to reclaim the theory in practice, so that what we claim in our constitution actually becomes real. So if you ask me, do we have accountable institutions? I would say yes, in principle. Do we have them in practice? Still work in progress.
Still work in progress. Talking about work in progress, if we should have to compile a to-do list for the next 10 years or so, what should be on that list? What must we work toward to try and attain this SDG 16?
Well, the first thing is a very important one, Doris. We'll have to break the new rise of nationalism around the world. The word nationalism here means, you know, make America great again. Britain must be outside of the European Union because Brussels is a threat to our freedom. You get the same kind of trend in Russia. We want to restore Russia to its former glory. Therefore, we will occupy the Crimean Peninsula. You get the Road and Belt Initiative from China because China say, we want to restore our place in the world. We are going to pass the United States in becoming the biggest GDP economy in the world. That talk is very dangerous for the SDG 16, because what SDG 16 says, we need to create peaceful and inclusive societies, and you cannot do that on a national level. So our first to do on this list is to really steer away from giving up on our liberal and democratic ideas and move back into closed isolation and nationalism, which is closely linked also to populistic politics. So that's the first one. Secondly, on a global scale, we need to really entrench the organizations that we do have. I mean, all the United Nations subcommittees that also work with the SDGs, they are important. One can criticize them, one can say they're useless, but the point is, if you break them down, what is your alternative? We do need that. And then in South Africa, the process just started. We are making small progress, is to reclaim the moral authority of our very important institutions. My guess is that if we do these things, all three at the same time, we may be able to turn the tide and create really peaceful and inclusive institutions, but it's not a short-term job. If we really get it right, I talk about 5 to 7 years to get us back to a situation of global and local justice.
Wow. Piet, as always, your wise words are so inspiring. Thank you very much for talking to us. I've learned a lot again from listening to you, and all the best for the rest of the year.
Thank you, Doris, and good luck to the IFR, the wonderful work that you guys do to help us think in a crisis. One tends to close your mind because you focus on what is now at hand, but it's very important that we keep our minds open. That is what leadership requires from us. Go well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching this episode of The Future of the Sustainable Development Goals. Please click on the logo below to subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for more great content. Don't miss the next episode.